Hello everyone. So I'm on the laptop again, but I thought we could do another little dialogue tutorial because I really like the way the Zelda ones do it, where it has that little typewriter kind of approach. And we'll make it a component so that we can just apply it to whatever we want, even random objects. I'm a cute bro. Alright, so let's jump over into a clean project and take a look. There's. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to need an input. So I'm going to go into the project settings. And under the inputs, I'm going to add an action mapping. This is going to be my interact button so that I can run up to stuff and interact with it. So I'm going to just set it to be my E key, like that. And I'm going to save. And then in the third person folder, in the blueprints folder, I'm storing this along with the character. I'm going to right click and create a blueprint interface. That will be my player underscore BPI. This is how I'll communicate from the object I'm trying to speak with, communicate all the stuff back to the player. So we're going to need two functions in here. One called check speaking and another one called speaking. Now for the check speaking, this will basically fire off. We don't want it to interrupt whatever we're saying, whatever's being said at the moment. So this will double check to make sure nothing's going on. So this will have an output of a Boolean that will just be B speaking. Now the speaking function will have two inputs. The first one is the dialogue that's actually being spoken, so that'll just be dialogue, and it will be a string. And then we'll add one more input that will be the text delay. And this is how the time in between each letter being applied. So compile and save that real quick. We can close it. Now let's right click and we're going to create a blueprint class of an actor component. This will be our dialogue underscore C. And we'll double click and open that up and we'll delete both those right there. Because we're just going to create our own custom event. So right click custom event. This will be called speaking or speak or speech, whatever you like. I'm going to add a couple of variables. First one is going to be dialogue. Now since this component will be applied to different characters, we're going to make this a string and an array so that we can have multiple strings of dialogue for each one. And because it will be applied to multiple characters, we want it to be editable on instance of the blueprint. So we'll click that little I so that each character can have something different. Now the next one is going to be the text delay. This one will be a float, but not an array. But it will have that little I open so that each character, maybe you want someone talks a little slower because they're older, maybe there's for dramatic purpose, whatever. Now we'll be able to adjust each one's. I am going to set a default on this one of 0.025. Now we're going to add another. This one's going to be an integer, and it's going to be current dialogue. So we'll make that an integer, and this will basically be what position they're in inside this dialogue tree. So when they're speaking, we basically want to tell the player character what's being said. So we'll get the player character. First, we will check the speaking, and we'll set that up in the player in a little bit. We'll add a branch right here, and if this comes back false, as in nothing is being said at the moment, then we will get the dialogue. We want to get a copy of the line at the dialogue point that we're currently at, and move this up here, and I'm going to call that speaking message. So I'll plug this in here. For the dialogue, I'll plug the dialogue string into the string here. The text delay goes into there. Now I'm going to take my current dialogue, and because we've read this line, we want it to be the next one, we will increment it. But when we increment it, we don't want it to go past a certain point. So what we want is to make sure that we're not exceeding the length of our dialogue array. Because if we're trying to get the line after it that doesn't exist, then it will just pop up blank. So we want to get the length of our array, because that measures how many individual units are inside of an array. So we want to compare and make sure that this is not greater than or equal to this. Because once it's equal to it, that means it's at the very last one. So we'll add a branch right here. And if it is, then we'll set that current dialog back to 0 so that we can cycle through our messages again. Just going to double click and add that right there. Bueno. Alright, save everything real quick. Now we need a widget to actually display our dialogue, so I'm going to create a user interface widget blueprint user widget. This is going to be my player HUD underscore UI or underscore W, whichever you prefer. Double click and open that up. First thing we are going to need is a canvas panel, because it makes it a lot easier trying to build all this stuff. Then we'll right click. We're going to wrap that canvas panel with a scale box. Scale box. I was on it. Then we're going to wrap the canvas panel one more time with a size box. Now that size box, we're going to highlight it and do the width and height override for whatever resolution you're currently running. For me, I'm at a 16 by 9, so I'm going to be doing 1920 by 1080. Basically, you want that canvas panel, that green line, to just be right there inside that dotted line. So we'll compile that real quick. We'll add another canvas panel that I'm going to anchor to the bottom, so anchors bottom. I'm going to reset all the offsets back to 0. For the alignment on the Y, because I want it to sit above the anchor instead of below, I'm going to set it to be 1.15. That lifts it up above. So if I size this up a little bit, when it's at 0, it sits below. And if I set it at 1, it sits directly on top. Setting it at 1.15 moves it up and then a little bit off of the anchor. For the offset left, I'm going to set this to 25 off the left and 25 off the right, just to give us a nice little cushion, just like that. Now I'm going to add an image to the background, which I will anchor to the full screen, all offsets to 0, and set the color black and the opacity to 0.5. That way it's a little bit see-through. Just for an extra little touch, I'm going to look for a background blur and add it onto there. Anchor it also to the full screen and reset all the offsets. And then for the blur strength, I'll set it to about 2, just to kind of blur out the background a little bit. Now we are going to need a text block, which is, if you just search text under the common, it's this one with the T. So I'm going to drop it onto the canvas panel on the right. I don't want it to be attached to the background blur. Probably doesn't make much of a difference, but I just don't like it personally. So I'm going to anchor it to the full thing, reset all the offsets, and then for the Z order, I'm just going to set this to 1 to make sure it doesn't get blurred out by my background blur. It shouldn't, since it sits lower in the hierarchy, but just to be safe. I want to adjust the font a little bit, and set it to about 35, and maybe italic. That'd be cool. Now for the wrapping, we'll just click auto wrap text so that if it carries on, it'll fix itself up. Now I'm going to name this canvas panel my speech bubble and make it a variable. And then for my text block, this will be my, we'll just call it speech. And it is also a variable. Compile that. And then in the graph, we'll get rid of all this. Right click and we'll create another custom event called INC speech, incoming speech. It will have a couple inputs, namely being the dialogue that's being spoken, which will be a string, and the text delay, which will be our flute. So the handy thing about doing it as a string instead of a text is you can actually get the length of a string as if it was an array. So if you drag off and type len, this one right here returns the number of characters in that string. What you can also do is you can get a substring, which will create a string out of a string, essentially. It'll measure certain letters starting at one index and then going as many as you put. So if you have the word hello written and you start at 0 and go 1, it'll give you the H. If you start at 1 and go, let's say the length is 3, then it'll give you ELL. It's a handy little feature and I greatly appreciate it. So let's right click, we'll promote this start variable, or the start index, to a variable called current index. Because we're going to increment that each time we iterate through, and that way it knows to start at the next letter to add it to our string. So we're going to take our dialog. Let's get our speech bubble, because each time we call this thing, we want to make sure we're resetting it. Set text back to 0. We'll set our current index back to 0. And then we will set text one more time. And we are going to, in the in text right here, we're going to append. Oh, I guess we got to do it here. We'll append here. So what we're going to be doing is taking our new letter and adding it to another variable that we add. So I'm going to take this from the A and move it to B. To move a line like that, you can hold Control and just drag it like that. And then I'm going to promote this one to a variable called current speech. And this will keep track of what letters have already been said. So we'll plug that in right there. Okay, and now we want to see if our current index is, well, actually, no. We want to get our current index and then increment it. Because each time we move through, we want to go one letter at a time. We want to get the next index of that string. So now we're going to see if it's greater than, no, let's do less than. If it's less than the length of our string, we'll do a branch. And if it is, we'll add a delay right here with a D and a left click. We'll hook our text delay up right to it. And then we can drag this back. Oh, before we do that, let's grab this and move it a little bit, because we're going to need to set our current speech to our appended version of the speech. That way it knows what's been updated, and when it iterates back through, it'll update as it should. So now we can take this all the way back. I don't like it sitting like that, so I'm going to double click and add some reroutes. And we'll go ahead and check this real quick. Well, let's set it up so we can check it. So what we need to do is go into the third person character now, or whatever character you're using. And on the begin play, we are going to create widget. And the widget we're going to create is our player HUD. We will promote that to a variable called player HUD. And then we'll add it to the viewport. Now we need to set up our interact trace, so I'm going to right click and get my interact action event right there. Create a function called interact trace. I'm going to go back into the event graph real quick and just hook that to the pressed so that I don't forget, because I always do. I'm going to compile real quick. So let's go into the viewport real quick and highlighting our mesh. Let's just add a scene component real quick, because this is where we can fire our line trace or our sphere trace from. You don't have to fire it from here. You can fire it from, if you got a first-person camera, fire it from the camera, fire it from the player, whatever you like to do. This is just the way I've come to do it now. So in my interact trace, I'm going to get my scene component. I'm going to want to do a sphere trace by channel. And I'm going to get the world location of my scene component. And then I'm going to subtract 90 from it for the end. So scene component get world location hooked to the start, get world location subtracting 90 from it for the end. Radius, I'm going to say about 45. And let's do a draw debug for duration just to see how that looks real quick. You can move it down and move it around if you like, in case you got things on the ground you want to look at. But now you can do all that. So I'm going to break this hit result in our interact trace. I'm going to add B left click for a branch right here. And on hit actor, I want to get component by class. And the component I'm looking for is the dialog component that we set up. So off of get component by class, component, I keep saying that wrong. I'm going to see if it is valid, because if it is valid, that means it has one. Huzzah, huzzah, we can talk to it. If it is valid, then we will call our speaking function directly in that dialog component. So save everything real quick. Let's see if we're hitting stuff. Yeah, we're hitting stuff. So now I'm going to highlight this cube right here. And over here in the details panel, you can actually add components even to static objects. So I'm going to, oops, I don't need to write component. I need to type dialog component. And for the dialog, I'm just going to say, hello there. And we'll see how that works. Crap. Okay. Ah, because we never... Oh, and that needs to be on the false. So in the third person character, we need to set up, the actual player blueprint interface. So in the third person character, under the class settings, it helps if we actually add this, I suppose. Let's add the player BPI so we can actually register all this. So now we have access to this little interfaces channel right here. And the check speaking, we'll check it in a little bit. But for right now, I'm just going to bypass it. So we'll just go straight into speaking for a second just to see if it is functioning as intended. Get player characters, speaking. Oh. I keep jumping the gun. Let's set up an actual speaking event. So if you double click and add that speaking, the golden one, we can get player HUD and we can just call our custom event, INC speech. Of the INC speech. And then we can plug these in like so. And now, there we go. It's typing it out, but it's not clearing it out. So what we can do is in the player HUD, right here at the beginning, we'll take our speech, the speech variable, we're setting it to 0. We'll take our current speech, and we will set that back to blank. So now each time we talk to it, yeah, typing it out, nice and easy peasy. Oh, let's check out, make sure that the speed variable is working. So dialog, I'm going to set this to 0.1 and see if the letters come out slower. Yeah. Alright, alright. So we don't want this to be visible on screen until we actually talk to someone. So back in the designer graph, we're going to highlight the speech bubble itself, and then we're going to set its visibility to hidden. So that in our third person character, actually we'll do it right at the beginning of the speech thingy. Let's see, I'll just move this back a little bit, grab my speech bubble, and I'll set visibility here. So I'll hook that in, drop it in place, create a little bit more room, and then bam. Alright, and then at the end of it, if the current index is not less than the length of our string, that means we've typed in our final letter. We'll add a little bit of a delay. You can set this to be whatever you want it to be. It's basically how long the text will be on screen after it's filled. I'm just going to do 1.5 for now. And then after that, I'm going to get my speech bubble and set the visibility back to hidden. So if we jump in, shouldn't be on screen. It is not. Huzzah. So let's check out and what happens when I talk to you. Hello there. Now it times out, and then it comes back, and then we're good. Now there are a few things we can do. So I'm going to set this back to 0.025. I'm going to add one more line, because I want to show you a glitch that if you stop right now, it's going to have some issues. So, hello there. How are you doing today? And what you'll notice is if I run up and I just start hammering on the E key, well, I guess it doesn't have that issue. Every once in a while it would have an issue of mixing text. So if you have a situation where if you hammer the E key and it starts splicing both lines together, it's because it's updating this and then continuing on its path. So what we can do is we can prevent it from being able to accept input as long as it's currently doing its thing. So what we'll do is I'll just back this up a little bit further, add in a branch, hook this to the false. I'm going to untick this condition variable before I could promote this to a variable. So promote, and we'll call this looping. So let me back this up a little bit. We'll drop this in between and set it true. So while it's true, basically I don't want it to accept any input or update itself or anything. And then over here towards the end, I'm going to set looping back to false. But because we do have a delay, if we do interact with it and it updates the text, it'll clear itself out pretty quickly sometimes if it's lined up just right. So what we can do is we'll add a branch right here to see if looping is still false. And if it is, then we'll set it to hidden. But if it's true, then we'll just let it do its thing. Now might be when we get that bleeding into each other text thing. Yeah. So now it'll do that. But we have this check speaking variable or boolean, and what we can do is we just pull out that player HUD and get that looping, plug it in right there, and then that should be all good. Oh, it's because I bypassed it. So make sure that in the dialog component we actually hook the check speaking back up and make sure it's only executing on the false. Excellent. So if we have something saying, let's say he's saying something really, really long. 'Twas a cold and dreary night, and I had to walk to the mailbox. I don't know why. It's just what came to head. Alright, I hammer on the key and it does nothing. How are you doing today? It was a cold and dreary night. Alright. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, let's add it to this one too. Let's add that dialogue component. Nice day. Oh. And we'll make this one talk. Oh, he talked fast. I had a really big cup of coffee and now I can hear colors. So you'll be able to adjust the speed. This one's still talking kind of slow. Save everything, and I feel like I'm forgetting something, but that seems to be everything. Alright, so quick little recap. We've set up a dialogue component that can be attached to any character or object or even some static meshes or whatever you want to add it to. We're checking to see if it's currently in use, and if it's not, we're calling our player blueprint interface function of speech to get the current dialogue and filtering it through with a text delay. Then we're adding it to our HUD, making sure that we're not currently looping through a string in order to build a message, setting that visibility to visible. At the very beginning, we're clearing out all of the things so that it starts straight from fresh every single time. Then we're getting the substring and length of the string that's coming in to compare it to our current speech that we're appending to. Then we're building that into a string and applying it to our text box and setting our current speech to a new variable so that it knows to build upon that. Incrementing the current index, seeing if it's less than the length, and if it is, re-looping back through. And then when it's done, carrying on. Okay, I'm believing that's it, so let's just jump in real quick. Probably something I'm forgetting, but I'll do a follow-up if there is. So just let me know in the comments. And if you like this kind of stuff, just, do the YouTube spiel. I don't like saying it. All right, see y'all in the next one. Bye.